Your mind is out of control. Right now, as you listen to this, thoughts are racing. Worries are spinning. Mental noise is drowning out everything that matters. You cannot focus. You cannot think clearly. You cannot make decisions from calm. And this internal chaos is destroying your life. Your relationships suffer because you cannot be present. Your work suffers because you cannot concentrate. Your peace suffers because you cannot quiet the noise. But there is another way, an ancient practice that separates those who react from those who dominate. Mental silence, the ability to quiet the storm inside your head, to command stillness when chaos wants to reign, to control your internal world so completely that no external circumstance can disturb you. This audiobook will teach you that practice, the discipline of internal silence that changes everything. Stop being controlled by your thoughts. Start controlling them. Chapter 1. Your mind is not your friend. Your mind is working against you. Right now, in this moment, as you listen to these words, your mind is generating noise, producing thoughts you did not request, creating worries you do not need, replaying memories that do not serve you, projecting futures that may never arrive. Your mind is doing all of this without your permission, without your direction, without any regard for what you actually need. And you have been treating this mind as a friend, as an ally, as something on your side. This is your fundamental error. Your mind is not your friend. Your mind is an untrained force that will destroy everything you're trying to build if you do not learn to control it. Here is what you need to understand. The untrained mind is adversarial, not intentionally, not maliciously, but mechanically. The mind produces thoughts the way the heart produces beats, automatically, continuously, without stop. But unlike heartbeats, which serve you reliably, most thoughts do not serve you at all. Most thoughts are noise, useless mental activity that consumes energy, destroys focus, and prevents peace. You did not ask for these thoughts. You do not want these thoughts, but they arrive anyway, endlessly, relentlessly, and you have been treating this assault as normal, as acceptable, as just how minds work. That is the key. Your mind will destroy you if you let it lead. Not might destroy you, will destroy you. The untrained mind, left in charge, produces anxiety, produces depression, produces scattered attention that accomplishes nothing, produces chronic worry that solves nothing, produces a quality of life far below what you are capable of experiencing. You have been letting your mind lead, and you have been wondering why your life feels out of control. The connection is direct. The cause is clear. Your mind is in charge, and your mind should not be in charge. Think about what your mind does without your direction. You try to fall asleep. Your mind races through tomorrow's problems. You try to focus on work. Your mind wanders to worries completely unrelated to the task. You try to enjoy a moment of peace. Your mind intrudes with criticism, comparison, or concern. You try to be present with someone you love. Your mind pulls you into past arguments or future fears. In every moment where you want quiet, your mind produces noise. In every moment where you want focus, your mind produces distraction. This is not alliance. This is opposition. You have a choice. Continue treating your mind as a friend and continue suffering the consequences of its uncontrolled activity, or recognize the adversarial relationship and begin the work of establishing command. One path is familiar. It requires nothing because it changes nothing. You simply continue as you have been, dominated by mental noise, unable to access the clarity and peace that should be available. The other path requires effort. It requires discipline. It requires the fundamental shift in understanding that this chapter introduces. Your mind is not your friend. It must be controlled, not followed. Here is how mental noise actually operates. Your mind produces thoughts continuously. This production is not optional. You cannot stop thoughts from arising any more than you can stop digestion from occurring. The production is automatic. But here's what most people miss. The production of thoughts and your engagement with those thoughts are different things. Thoughts arise automatically. Engagement is a choice. The mind produces noise. You decide whether to amplify that noise through attention or let it fade through disengagement. Consider the nature of the thoughts your mind produces. Fear thoughts about things that will never happen. Worry thoughts about problems you cannot solve through worrying. Critical thoughts about yourself that serve no constructive purpose. Comparison thoughts that make you feel inadequate. Regret thoughts that replay decisions you cannot change. Future projection thoughts that create anxiety about events that may never occur. This is what your mind produces. Without direction, without purpose, without any consideration of whether these thoughts help or harm you. The untrained mind does not distinguish between useful and useless thought. It simply produces a useful thought about solving a real problem, a useless thought about a fear that will never materialize. To the untrained mind, these are the same. Both receive attention. Both consume energy. Both feel equally valid. But they are not equally valid. The useful thought serves you. The useless thought harms you. And the untrained mind, your supposed friend, generates far more useless thoughts than useful ones. That is the key. Most of what your mind produces is garbage. Not some of it. Most of it. The percentage of your thoughts that are genuinely useful, genuinely necessary, genuinely serving your interests is small. The percentage that is noise, distraction, worry, and waste is enormous. And you have been treating all of this output as valuable. You have been attending to the garbage as if it were treasure. You have been following the noise as if it were signal. Your mind produces mostly waste, and you have been treating it like wisdom. It is not about hating your mind. It is not about viewing your mind as an enemy to be destroyed. It is about recognizing that your mind is a tool that must be trained. A powerful tool. A tool capable of solving complex problems, creating beautiful things, and navigating difficult situations. But a tool nonetheless. And like any tool, it serves you only when you control it. A chainsaw in skilled hands clears forests and builds homes. A chainsaw running wild destroys everything it touches. Your mind is the chainsaw. The question is whether you control it or it controls you. Here is the distinction that changes everything. You're not your thoughts. You are the one who can observe your thoughts. This separation between the thinker and the thoughts is the foundation of all mental discipline. When a thought arises, there's the thought and there is the awareness of the thought. The thought is mental content. The awareness is you. These are not the same thing. The thought comes and goes. The awareness remains. The thought is produced automatically. The awareness can be directed deliberately. Consider what this means. If you were your thoughts, you could not observe them. You cannot observe something you are. You can only observe something separate from you. The fact that you can watch a thought arise, notice it, and let it pass proves that you are not that thought. You are the watcher, the observer, the awareness in which thoughts appear. This observer has always existed. You have simply been so identified with the content of your mind that you forgot the observer was there. You have a choice. Remain identified with your thoughts and remain controlled by every piece of mental noise that arises. Or recognize yourself as the observer and gain the foundation from which mental control becomes possible. Identification means slavery. Every anxious thought becomes your anxiety. Every critical thought becomes your self-image. Every worried thought becomes your state. But observation means freedom. Anxious thoughts arise, and you watch them without becoming anxious. Critical thoughts arise, and you observe them without adopting them. Worried thoughts arise, and you notice them without being consumed by them. This distinction is not philosophy. This distinction is practical technology. The recognition that you are not your thoughts, but the observer of your thoughts, is the first and most essential step in mental discipline. Without it, control is impossible. You cannot control what you are. You can only control what is separate from you. The mind is a tool. You are the user. The mind produces thoughts. You decide what to do with them. The mind generates noise. You determine whether that noise dominates your experience or fades into irrelevance. Your mind is not your friend. Your mind is an untrained tool that has been running your life without your conscious direction. The noise it produces has been costing you focus, peace, relationships, and achievement. But the tool can be trained. The noise can be reduced. The mind can be brought under command. It starts with recognizing the truth of this adversarial relationship. It continues with understanding that you are separate from your thoughts. It culminates in the mental discipline that this audiobook will teach you. You understand now that your mind is not your friend. You see that the untrained mind produces mostly noise. You recognize the distinction between you and your thoughts. But understanding the problem is only the beginning. You must also understand what this problem is costing you. The full price you are paying for mental chaos. The damage that noise has already done. Chapter 2. The noise is costing you everything. You are paying a price for mental chaos. Every day, every hour, every moment that your mind runs uncontrolled, you pay. The price is invisible. The price is silent. The price does not announce itself with invoices or receipts. But the price is real, and it is enormous. Your mental noise is costing you focus, costing you presence, costing you decision-making quality, costing you relationships, costing you peace, costing you sleep, costing you health, costing you achievement, costing you the life you could be living if your mind were quiet instead of chaotic. You have been paying this price without knowing you were paying it, without calculating the total, without recognizing that the cost continues accumulating with every moment of uncontrolled mental activity. Here is what you need to understand. Mental noise is not free. It feels free. It seems like just how minds work, like background static that costs nothing because it has always been there. But noise consumes resources. Attention that goes to mental chatter cannot go to important tasks. Energy that fuels worry cannot fuel productive action. Presence that is stolen by internal noise cannot be given to the people and moments that matter. Every unit of mental noise extracts a unit of something valuable. The extraction is constant. The accumulation is devastating. That is the key. Every uncontrolled thought is a tax you pay in lost potential. Not some thoughts. Every uncontrolled thought. The anxious thought about tomorrow steals attention from what you are doing today. The critical thought about yourself drains energy that could fuel confidence. The worried thought about a problem steals focus from a solution. Each thought seems small. Each tax seems minor. But the accumulation over hours, days, years becomes an enormous sum. You have been paying this tax your entire life, and you have never calculated what it has cost you. Think about what mental noise costs you in focus. You sit down to work on something important. Your mind immediately begins producing unrelated content. Worries about other tasks, memories of past events, plans for future activities, random associations that lead nowhere. You try to focus, and the noise pulls you away. Again and again. The task that should take 1 hour takes 3 because 2 hours were lost to mental noise. The project that should receive your best thinking receives scattered, interrupted, fragmented attention instead. The work that could be excellent becomes merely adequate because noise prevented the deep engagement that excellence requires. Consider the professionals who excel in your field, the ones who produce remarkable work. The ones who seem to accomplish in hours what takes others days. They are not necessarily more intelligent than you. They are not necessarily more talented. They have learned, consciously or unconsciously, to quiet their mental noise. They can focus. They can engage deeply. They can give their full attention to what they're doing without the constant interruption of uncontrolled mental activity. Their quiet minds produce what your noisy mind cannot. And you have been competing against them with a severe handicap you did not know you had. You have a choice. Continue paying the focus tax and continue underperforming relative to your potential. or learn to quiet the noise and discover what you are actually capable of when your full attention is available. One path accepts diminished performance as normal. The other path pursues the clarity that would transform your output. One path loses hours daily to mental noise. The other path reclaims those hours for productive use. Here is what mental noise costs you in presence. You are with someone who matters to you. A partner, a child, a friend, a colleague. They're speaking to you. And where are you? Lost in your own head, thinking about something that happened earlier, worrying about something that might happen later, planning something unrelated to this moment. Your body is present. Your mind is elsewhere. And they can tell. They always can. The connection that could happen does not happen. The intimacy that could develop does not develop. The relationship that could deepen remains shallow because you cannot show up fully when your mind is full of noise. Consider the moments you have missed. The conversations where you heard words but did not truly listen. The experiences where you were physically present but mentally absent. The opportunities for connection that passed because you could not quiet the noise long enough to engage. These moments cannot be recovered. These costs are permanent. The child who wanted your attention received your distraction. The partner who sought connection found you unreachable. The friend who needed your presence got your physical shell while your mind was elsewhere. That is the key. Mental noise builds walls between you and everyone you care about. Not visible walls, not intentional walls, but walls nonetheless. The noise occupies the space where presence should be. The internal chatter drowns out the external connection. You cannot be fully with someone when you are constantly with your own thoughts. And you have been constantly with your own thoughts, building walls without knowing you were building them, creating distance without intending to create it. It is not about being a bad person. It is not about not caring. It is about mechanical reality. Attention is finite. What goes to internal noise cannot go to external connection. You have been directing attention inward toward mental chatter when it should have been directed outward toward the people and experiences that matter. The direction was not chosen consciously. It was the default of an untrained mind. But the consequences were real regardless of intention. Here is what mental noise costs you in decision-making. Every important decision requires clarity, requires the ability to assess options accurately, requires access to your own wisdom about what is right for you. Mental noise prevents all of this. The noise clouds assessment. The noise drowns out wisdom. The noise creates urgency where patience is needed, creates fear where courage is needed, creates confusion where clarity is needed. You have been making decisions through noise, and decisions made through noise are rarely good decisions. Consider the decisions you regret, the choices that seemed right in the moment but proved wrong in retrospect. How many of those decisions were made from clarity, from quiet assessment of what was actually best? How many were made from noise, from anxiety pushing toward premature action, from fear distorting your perception, from mental chaos preventing the clear seeing that good decisions require? The noise did not make those decisions for you, but the noise ensured that you could not make them well. You have a choice. Continue making decisions through noise and continue living with the consequences of clouded judgment. Or learn to quiet the noise before important decisions and access the clarity that has always been available beneath the chaos. The wisdom you need is there. The clear perception is possible. It is simply buried under noise that seems impossible to quiet, but is not impossible. It is a skill, a discipline, a practice that this audiobook will teach you. Here is what mental noise costs you in peace. Peace requires quiet, internal quiet, the absence of constant mental agitation. But your mind produces agitation continuously. Worry about things that may never happen. Regret about things that cannot be changed. Criticism about who you are. Comparison to who others are. Fear about what might go wrong. Anticipation of problems not yet arrived. This agitation is not peace. This agitation is the opposite of peace. and it runs constantly, preventing the experience of calm that should be your natural state. Consider when you last experienced genuine peace. Not distraction from noise, not temporary escape through entertainment. Genuine peace, internal quiet, the experience of simple presence without mental commentary. For most people, such moments are rare, brief, accidental, because their minds will not permit sustained peace. Their minds intrude constantly with content that destroys the quiet. Peace becomes something that happens occasionally by accident rather than something available whenever you want it. That is the key. Mental noise steals the peace that is your birthright. You are not born anxious. You are not born worried. You are not born with a mind full of chaos. The noise developed. The patterns formed. The chaos became normal. But beneath the noise, peace remains available. It has always been available. It is simply obscured by mental activity that seems impossible to stop. Learning to stop it, or at least to quiet it, restores access to peace that noise has been stealing your entire life. Here is what you must recognize. The costs are not separate. They compound. Lost focus leads to diminished achievement. Diminished achievement feeds the inner critic. The inner critic generates more noise. More noise steals more presence. Lost presence damages relationships. Damaged relationships create worry. Worry generates more noise. The cycle continues. Each cost creates conditions for additional costs. The total is not the sum of individual costs. The total is the multiplication of interconnected damages. You have been living with this multiplication your entire life. Every domain affected. Every relationship touched, every achievement diminished, every moment of peace stolen. The untrained mind has been running the show, and the show has been costing you everything. But the costs are not inevitable. The costs are the consequence of an untrained mind. Train the mind, and the costs reduce. Quiet the noise, and what was being lost is reclaimed. The focus returns. The presence becomes possible. The decisions improve. The peace becomes accessible. Everything the noise has been stealing can be restored through the discipline you are learning. You understand now what mental noise is costing you. You see the tax being paid in focus, presence, decisions, and peace. You recognize the compounding nature of the damage. But understanding the cost is not enough. You must understand the solution. And the solution begins with a recognition you have not yet fully grasped. You are not your thoughts. You are something separate, something that can observe and ultimately control. Chapter 3. You are not your thoughts. You have been living a case of mistaken identity. Your entire life, you have believed that you are your thoughts, that when a thought arises, it is you thinking, that when worry appears, it is you worrying, that when criticism emerges, it is you criticizing yourself. This belief is so deep, so fundamental, so unquestioned that you have never examined it. But the belief is wrong, completely wrong. And this mistaken identity is the root cause of your inability to control your mind. You cannot control what you believe you are. You can only control what is separate from you. Until you understand that you are not your thoughts, mental discipline remains impossible. You remain trapped inside the noise, unable to recognize that you could be standing outside it. Here is what you need to understand. Thoughts arise in you the way sounds arise around you. You do not believe you are the sounds you hear. A car passes and makes noise. You hear the noise. You do not become the noise. You do not identify with the noise. The noise is simply something that occurred in your environment. Thoughts operate the same way. A thought arises. You can notice the thought. You do not have to become the thought. You do not have to identify with the thought. The thought is simply something that occurred in your mental environment. But you have been becoming every thought, identifying with every mental arising. This identification is the prison you have been living in without knowing walls existed. That is the key. Thoughts arise. You are the one who watches them arise. This distinction changes everything. The thought is content. You are the awareness in which the content appears. The thought comes and goes. You remain. The thought is temporary. You're constant. The thought is produced automatically by mental machinery you do not control. You are the consciousness that can observe that machinery operating. These are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. You have simply confused them because the confusion was never corrected. Think about what happens when you believe you're your thoughts. An anxious thought arises. Because you believe you're your thoughts, you become anxious. The thought and your state become one. A critical thought arises. Because you identify with it, you become self-critical. The thought shapes your entire experience. A worried thought arises. Because you are identified, you become consumed with worry. The thought controls you completely because you believe the thought is you. Now consider what happens when you recognize thoughts as separate from you. An anxious thought arises. You observe it. You notice that anxiety is appearing in your mental space, but you do not become it. You watch it the way you would watch a cloud passing through the sky. The cloud appears. The cloud moves. The cloud disappears. You remain. The anxious thought appears. The anxious thought moves. The anxious thought disappears. You remain. Unchanged, untouched, aware of the thought, but not consumed by it. You have a choice. Continue identifying with every thought and remain controlled by every piece of mental content that arises. Or learn to observe thoughts without identification and gain freedom from the noise that has been controlling your life. One path keeps you imprisoned. The other path opens the cell door. One path means every thought has power over you. The other path means no thought has power unless you give it power. Here is what the observer self actually is. There's a part of you that watches, that notices, that is aware of experience without being consumed by experience. This observer has always been present. In every moment of your life, there has been awareness. Awareness of thoughts, awareness of feelings, awareness of sensations, awareness of the world around you. This awareness is not a thought. This awareness is what notices thoughts. This awareness is not a feeling. This awareness is what notices feelings. This awareness is you, the real you, the you that exists beneath and beyond all the mental content that seems so solid and so defining. Consider a moment when you caught yourself thinking. You were lost in thought, and then suddenly you noticed you were thinking. What noticed? It was not another thought. Thoughts do not observe themselves. It was something else, something that could step back and see the thinking happening. That something is the observer. That something is who you actually are. That something has always been there, overlooked because you were so focused on the content of thoughts that you ignored the awareness in which thoughts appear. That is the key. You are the awareness, not the content of awareness. This is not philosophy. This is direct experience available to you right now. Notice your current thoughts. The noticing itself is separate from what is noticed. The awareness is separate from what it is aware of. You can observe your thoughts, which proves you are not your thoughts. You cannot observe something you are. You can only observe something separate from you. The observation proves the separation. The separation is the foundation of freedom. It is not about rejecting thoughts. It is not about pretending you do not have thoughts. It is about recognizing the relationship correctly. Thoughts are mental events that occur in awareness. You are the awareness. Thoughts are visitors that come and go. You are the space in which they visit. Thoughts are productions of mental machinery. You are the consciousness that can watch the machinery operate. This correct recognition does not eliminate thoughts. This correct recognition changes your relationship to thoughts. And change relationship is what makes control possible. Here is how identification keeps you trapped. When you identify with a thought, the thought becomes your reality. It is not just something happening in your mind. It becomes the truth of who you are and how things are. An anxious thought identified with becomes genuine anxiety about genuine danger. A critical thought identified with becomes genuine inadequacy that defines you. A worried thought identified with becomes genuine problem that demands attention. Identification gives thoughts power they do not inherently possess. Identification transforms mental noise into experienced reality. Consider how much of your suffering comes from identification. The anxiety you feel is not caused by thoughts existing. The anxiety is caused by identifying with anxious thoughts. The self-criticism that hurts you is not caused by critical thoughts existing. The hurt is caused by identifying with critical thoughts. The worry that consumes you is not caused by worried thoughts existing. The consumption is caused by identifying with worried thoughts. Remove the identification and the thoughts lose their power. They become noise you can observe rather than reality you must inhabit. You have a choice. Continue identifying and continue transforming harmless mental noise into experienced suffering. Or practice disidentification and discover that thoughts cannot hurt you unless you become them. The practice is not easy. The habit of identification is deeply established, but the practice is possible, and the freedom it provides is worth every effort the practice requires. Here is how to begin experiencing the separation. Notice a thought arising right now. Do not try to stop it. Do not try to change it. Simply notice it. See that there is a thought, and there is the noticing of the thought. The thought is over there in your mental space, doing whatever it is doing. You're over here, observing. This simple noticing is the beginning of disidentification. This simple act of observation creates the distance that identification had collapsed. Practice this throughout your day. Catch yourself thinking and notice the catching. Observe mental content and recognize the observation as separate from the content. Build the habit of stepping back from thoughts instead of stepping into them. Each time you notice rather than identify, you strengthen the observer. Each time you observe rather than become, you expand the freedom that has always been available but was obscured by constant identification. That is the key. The observer strengthens through use. Like any capacity, awareness develops through exercise. The more you practice noticing thoughts without becoming them, the easier noticing becomes. The more you step back from mental content, the more natural stepping back feels. The observer that seemed weak compared to the power of thoughts becomes strong. The identification that seemed automatic becomes optional. The freedom that seemed impossible becomes accessible. Consider what this means for mental discipline. If you are your thoughts, you cannot control them. You can only be them. But if you are separate from your thoughts, control becomes possible. You can observe a thought and choose not to engage with it. You can notice a mental pattern and choose not to follow it. You can see noise arising and choose not to amplify it through attention. The separation creates the space in which choice exists. Without separation, there is no space. Without space, there is no choice. Without choice, there is no control. You're not your thoughts. You are the awareness that can observe thoughts. This truth is the foundation of everything that follows in this audiobook. Every technique depends on it. Every practice assumes it. Every result requires it. Until you experience this separation, not just understand it intellectually, but experience it directly, mental discipline remains theory rather than practice. The experience is available. The separation is real. You must simply learn to recognize what has always been true. You understand now that you are not your thoughts. You have glimpsed the observer self. You see how identification creates suffering and how disidentification creates freedom. But understanding the separation is only the beginning. You must learn to use it, to cultivate the stillness that becomes possible once you recognize you are not the noise. This cultivation is an ancient practice, a discipline of mental quieting that masters have understood for millennia. Chapter 4. The Ancient Practice of Mental Stillness. Stillness is not passive. This is where most people go wrong. They imagine mental stillness as relaxation, as letting go, as simply sitting quietly and hoping the noise subsides. But this is not stillness. This is waiting for stillness to happen to you. And waiting accomplishes nothing. Real stillness is active. Real stillness is discipline. Real stillness is the deliberate command of silence over a mind that wants to produce noise constantly. You do not find stillness. You create it. You do not hope for quiet. You demand it. The ancient practitioners understood this. They did not treat mental stillness as a vacation. They treated it as training, the most rigorous training a human being can undertake. Here is what you need to understand. Mental stillness is a skill, not a state that arrives randomly, not a gift possessed by some and unavailable to others. A skill. Like any skill, it develops through practice. Like any skill, it starts weak and becomes strong. Like any skill, it requires training that is often uncomfortable. You would not expect to play an instrument without practice. You would not expect to perform athletically without training. Yet you expect mental stillness to simply appear without any effort to develop it. This expectation is why you do not have it. That is the key. Stillness is not the absence of thought. Stillness is the command of thought. Thoughts may still arise in a still mind. The stillness is not about preventing thoughts. The stillness is about not being disturbed by thoughts, not being pulled by thoughts, not being controlled by thoughts. The still mind observes mental activity without engaging with it. The still mind notices thoughts arising and lets them pass without following. The still mind maintains its composure regardless of what mental content appears. This is command. This is discipline. This is the stillness that transforms everything. Think about what command actually means. A general commands an army. The army may move. The army may have activity. But the general is in command of that activity. The general directs it. The general is not overwhelmed by it. The general maintains position above the movement, directing rather than being swept along. Your relationship to your mind should be the same. The mind may produce thoughts. The mind may have activity, but you are in command of that activity. You observe it from a position of authority. You direct attention rather than having attention captured. You are the general, not a soldier being pushed wherever the battle flows. You have a choice. Continue hoping stillness will find you and continue being disappointed. Or begin training stillness as the skill it is and develop command over a mind that has been running wild. One path is passive, comfortable, requires nothing except continued waiting. The other path is active, demanding, requires effort that most people avoid. But only the active path produces results. Only the training path develops the stillness you need. Here is what the ancient practitioners understood. Throughout history, the most accomplished humans have trained their minds. This is not coincidence. This is cause and effect. The samurai did not become formidable warriors through physical training alone. They trained the mind with equal intensity. Mental discipline was considered essential for combat. A warrior overwhelmed by fear, distracted by noise, controlled by emotion would die regardless of physical skill. Only the warrior who could command stillness in chaos could perform at the level combat demanded. Consider the Stoic philosophers. They developed systematic practices for mental discipline. They understood that external circumstances cannot be controlled, but internal responses can. They trained themselves to maintain equanimity regardless of what happened around them. Wealth or poverty, honor or disgrace, health or sickness. The external varied. The internal remained stable. This stability was not natural temperament. This stability was trained discipline, developed through daily practice that most modern people have never attempted. Consider the monks who dedicated lifetimes to mental mastery. They withdrew from distraction not because the world was bad, but because the training required focus. They spent decades developing capacity for stillness that seems superhuman to untrained observers. But it was not superhuman. It was simply trained, deeply trained, consistently trained. training that accumulated over years into mastery that transformed every aspect of their experience. That is the key. Mental discipline has always been valued by those who achieved extraordinary things. This is not coincidence. This is recognition of cause and effect. The extraordinary requires capacity the ordinary do not develop. Mental stillness is that capacity. Mental command is that edge. Those who achieved what others could not possess what others did not cultivate. The training was the difference. The discipline was the advantage. It is not about becoming a monk. It is not about withdrawing from life. It is about recognizing that the training these masters developed is available to you. The practices exist. The techniques work. The discipline can be built without leaving your life, without abandoning your responsibilities, without becoming anything other than what you are. You simply add the training. You simply develop the skill. You simply build the stillness that will transform your capacity in every domain. Here is why modern life has made stillness rare. You live under constant assault. Notifications demanding attention. Information streams never stopping. Stimulation available every moment. Entertainment accessible always. Your mind is bombarded in ways no previous generation experienced. The monks trained in silence. You attempt to find stillness while carrying a device designed to interrupt you constantly. The samurai faced external enemies. You face algorithms engineered to capture and hold your attention. The battlefield has changed. The training has become harder. Consider what your environment does to your mind. Every notification trains distraction. Every scroll through endless content trains scattered attention. Every alert conditions you to respond immediately to external demands. You have been training your mind daily, but you have been training it in the wrong direction. You have been training chaos when you should have been training stillness. The environment has been your training program, and the environment is hostile to the stillness you need. This means the training must be deliberate. It cannot happen accidentally. The default of modern life produces scattered, noisy, chaotic minds. Only deliberate counter-training produces stillness. You must consciously develop what the environment is unconsciously destroying. You must actively build what passive living tears down. The training is not optional if you want stillness. The training is required because nothing else will produce it. You have a choice. Accept the default mind that modern life produces and accept the chaos that comes with it. Or engage in deliberate training that counters the environment and builds the stillness you need. One path is passive, requires no effort, produces no results. The other path is active, requires daily commitment, produces the command of mind that changes everything. Here is what the training actually involves. First, you must create space. Time in your day where external stimulation stops, where notifications are disabled, where information streams are paused, where the assault relents and training can occur. This space does not exist naturally. You must create it. You must protect it. You must treat it as essential rather than optional. In this space, you practice, not relaxation. Practice deliberate engagement with your mind for the purpose of developing stillness. You observe thoughts without engaging. You notice noise without amplifying. You maintain the position of the observer while mental activity occurs. Each time you successfully observe without engaging, you strengthen the capacity. Each time you remain still while thoughts try to pull you, you build the discipline. The practice is simple but not easy. Simple because the instructions are clear. Sit, observe, do not engage. Not easy because the mind resists. The mind produces compelling thoughts designed to pull your attention. The mind creates urgencies that feel like they must be addressed. The mind will do everything it can to prevent you from developing command over it. This resistance is expected. This resistance must be overcome through consistent practice. That is the key. Consistency matters more than duration. 10 minutes daily builds more stillness than an hour weekly. The mind adapts to regular training. The capacity develops through repeated exposure. Missing days weakens what previous days built. Maintaining the practice regardless of circumstances builds the discipline that sporadic practice cannot produce. The ancient practitioners trained daily, not because they had more time, because they understood that consistency is how mastery develops. You understand now that stillness is active discipline, not passive hope. You see the historical importance of mental training. You recognize why modern life makes stillness rare and training necessary. But stillness requires a specific focus. You must learn to command your attention, because where attention goes, everything follows. Chapter 5. Command your attention or lose everything. Your attention is the most valuable thing you possess. More valuable than money. More valuable than time. More valuable than any external resource you could accumulate. Because attention determines experience. What you attend to becomes your life. What you ignore ceases to exist for you. Every moment of your existence is shaped by where your attention goes. And right now, you do not control where your attention goes. Your attention is captured, stolen, directed by forces outside yourself toward ends that do not serve you. You have lost command of the most fundamental resource you have. And losing command of attention means losing command of everything. Here is what you need to understand. Attention is the fundamental resource from which everything else is built. Focus requires attention. Learning requires attention. Performance requires attention. Relationships require attention. Peace requires attention. Achievement requires attention. Nothing valuable happens without attention being directed toward it. Nothing meaningful develops without attention being sustained on it. Attention is not one resource among many. Attention is the resource that makes all other resources useful. Without command of attention, you have command of nothing. That is the key. Control your attention and you control your reality. This is not metaphor. This is mechanism. Your experience of reality is constructed from what you attend to. Two people in the same situation have different experiences because they attend to different aspects. One attends to problems and experiences difficulty. One attends to possibilities and experiences opportunity. Same situation, different attention, different reality. You do not experience the world directly. You experience what your attention selects from the world. Control the selection and you control the experience. Think about what happens when attention is uncontrolled. Your mind wanders constantly. It jumps from thought to thought without direction. It gets captured by whatever stimulus is most compelling in the moment. A notification pulls it here. A worry pulls it there. A memory pulls it somewhere else. There is no coherent direction. There is no sustained focus. There is only chaotic movement from capture to capture. And in this chaos, nothing substantial gets built. Nothing deep gets developed. Nothing meaningful gets accomplished. Because meaningful accomplishment requires sustained attention that chaos cannot provide. You have a choice. Continue allowing your attention to be captured and controlled by external forces and continue experiencing the fragmented life that produces. Or learn to command your attention and discover what becomes possible when you direct this fundamental resource deliberately. One path is passive. It accepts whatever captures attention as what deserves attention. The other path is active. It decides what deserves attention and directs attention there regardless of what tries to capture it. Here is how attention is stolen. Your attention is valuable, enormously valuable. And because it is valuable, others want it. Platforms want it because attention can be monetized. Advertisers want it because attention can be converted to sales. Media wants it because attention is their entire business model. An enormous infrastructure exists for the sole purpose of capturing and holding your attention. Billions of dollars are spent researching how to capture attention more effectively. The best minds of a generation work on making their products more attention-capturing than their competitors. You are not fighting distraction. You are fighting an industry engineered to exploit your psychological vulnerabilities. Consider the sophistication of what you are facing. Notification systems designed to create urgency where none exists. Content algorithms that learn exactly what captures your attention and serve you more of it. Variable reward schedules that create addiction through unpredictability. Social validation mechanics that exploit your need for approval. Infinite scroll that removes natural stopping points. Every element is designed. Every feature is optimized. Optimized not for your benefit, but for attention capture. You're using products created by teams of engineers and psychologists whose explicit goal is to make you unable to stop using the product. That is the key. Your attention is under deliberate, sophisticated, well-funded attack. Understanding this changes how you approach the battle. You're not weak for losing attention to these systems. They were designed by experts to defeat your resistance. But understanding the attack reveals what defense requires. Defense requires deliberate countermeasures. Defense requires training that matches the sophistication of the assault. Defense requires treating attention as the precious resource it is and protecting it accordingly. It is not about rejecting technology entirely. It is about recognizing the game being played and refusing to be a passive victim. You can use technology without being used by it, but this requires awareness of how capture works, requires boundaries that protect your attention, requires training that strengthens your capacity to direct attention where you choose rather than where you are pulled. Here is how to reclaim sovereign attention. First, recognize captures as they happen. Most attention capture occurs unconsciously. You did not decide to check your phone. You found your phone in your hand. You did not decide to scroll for an hour. An hour passed while you were scrolling. The capture bypassed conscious decision entirely. Reclamation begins with awareness. Noticing when attention has been captured. Noticing what captured it. Noticing how the capture occurred. This noticing is the first step in building the gap between stimulus and response that allows choice. Second, create friction for capture and ease for focus. The systems designed to capture attention minimize friction. One click, one swipe, one glance. Reclaiming attention requires adding friction back. Notifications disabled. Apps removed or buried in folders. Devices placed in other rooms. Physical barriers that interrupt automatic capture. Simultaneously, reduce friction for what deserves attention. Workspace clear. Materials ready. Environment arranged for focus. Make capture difficult and focus easy instead of the reverse. Third, practice directed attention deliberately. Like any skill, attention direction strengthens through practice. Choose an object of focus, a task, a breath, a single point of awareness. Direct attention there. When attention wanders, notice and return it. Again and again. Each return is a repetition that builds the muscle. Each successful redirection strengthens the capacity for sovereign attention. This practice is not incidental. This practice is essential training for a mind assaulted by capture attempts constantly. You have a choice. Implement these practices and begin reclaiming attention, or continue as a passive target for capture and continue losing the resource that determines everything. The practices require effort. The practices require consistency, but the practices produce results. Reclaimed attention. Restored focus. The capacity to direct where you attend rather than being directed by whatever captures you. Here is what sovereign attention makes possible. Deep work becomes accessible. The sustained focus that produces excellence. The concentrated attention that creates breakthrough. The hours of uninterrupted engagement that build mastery. None of this is possible with fragmented attention. All of it becomes possible when attention is commanded rather than captured. Presence becomes available. When you control attention, you can give it fully to this moment, to this person, to this experience. The wandering mind that prevents presence is simply attention running uncontrolled. Command attention and presence follows naturally. You can be fully here because you can direct your attention to stay here. Peace becomes the default. Much mental noise is simply attention being captured by worries, fears, and concerns. When you command attention, you can choose not to direct it toward noise. You can attend to calm instead of chaos, to stillness instead of agitation, to peace instead of worry. The choice becomes available because command makes choice possible. That is the key. Everything you want requires attention you currently do not command. The focus for achievement, the presence for relationship, the peace for well-being. All of it depends on attention. All of it becomes accessible when attention is reclaimed. All of it remains blocked while attention is captured by forces that do not care about your focus, your presence, or your peace. Consider the difference between the person who commands attention and the person who does not. One accomplishes in hours what the other cannot accomplish in days. One is fully present with loved ones while the other is mentally absent even when physically there. One experiences peace as a baseline while the other experiences constant agitation. Same capabilities, same circumstances, different command of attention, different results in every domain. The training is not optional. The training is not supplemental. The training is essential for any life worth living. Because without command of attention, you command nothing. Without sovereign direction of this fundamental resource, every other resource is wasted. You can have time, but waste it through fragmented attention. You can have opportunity, but miss it through captured focus. You can have everything except the attention to use it. And without that attention, everything becomes nothing. You understand now that attention is fundamental. You see how it is stolen and how to reclaim it. You recognize what sovereign attention makes possible. But there's a tool you carry with you always that can help you command both attention and the mind itself. A tool so simple it is overlooked, so constant it is ignored. Your breath is the control center for your entire mental state. Chapter 6. The breath is your control center. You have been breathing your entire life without recognizing what you hold. Every breath is a lever, a control mechanism that directly influences your mental state. Fast breathing produces fast thinking. Slow breathing produces slow thinking. Chaotic breathing produces chaotic mind. Controlled breathing produces control mind. This connection is not metaphor. This connection is physiology. The breath and the mind are linked through systems so fundamental that changing one automatically changes the other. You have had access to a control center for your mind your entire life. You simply never learned to use it. Here is what you need to understand. The breath-mind connection operates in both directions. When your mind becomes anxious, your breathing becomes rapid and shallow. You have experienced this. The anxiety changes the breath automatically. But the reverse is also true. When your breathing becomes rapid and shallow, your mind becomes anxious. The breath changes the mind automatically. This bidirectional connection is your access point. You may not be able to directly command your mind to calm down, but you can command your breath to slow down. And when your breath slows, your mind follows. That is the key. Control your breath, and you control your mind. This is the most immediate technique available to you, the most accessible tool you possess. You do not need special circumstances. You do not need equipment. You do not need years of training before results appear. You need only the breath you're already taking and the knowledge of how to use it. The control center is built into your body. The control mechanism operates automatically. You must simply learn to operate the controls deliberately instead of letting them run on default. Think about what happens when you are stressed. Your breathing shifts without your conscious direction. It becomes shallow. It becomes rapid. It moves to your chest instead of your belly. This shift is not random. This shift is your nervous system responding to perceived threat. The shallow, rapid breathing prepares you for physical action, for fighting or fleeing. This response served your ancestors well when threats were physical and immediate. But most modern threats are not physical. They do not require fighting or fleeing. Yet your breathing responds as if they do. And this breathing response creates the mental state of anxiety, even when anxiety serves no purpose. Now consider what happens when you deliberately intervene. You notice the stress. You notice the breathing has changed. And instead of allowing the automatic response to continue, you take command. You slow the breath. You deepen the breath. You move it from chest to belly. You breathe as if no threat exists. And something remarkable happens. Your mind believes the breath. Your nervous system receives the signal that all is well. The anxiety that seemed so solid begins to dissolve. Not because you told your mind to calm down, because you told your body to breathe like calm. And the mind followed. You have a choice. Continue allowing breath to run on automatic and continue having your mental state determined by default responses. Or learn to use breath as a control lever and gain immediate access to mental states you could not command directly. One path leaves you reactive, anxious when circumstances trigger anxiety, stressed when situations trigger stress. The other path makes you responsive, able to intervene in your own state, able to choose calm even when circumstances suggest panic. Here is how the mechanism actually works. Your nervous system has two primary modes. Sympathetic activation prepares you for action. Heart rate increases. Breathing becomes rapid. Blood flows to muscles. Mind becomes alert and narrow-focused. Parasympathetic activation allows rest and recovery. Heart rate decreases. Breathing becomes slow. Blood flows to digestive and restorative systems. Mind becomes calm and broad-focused. These modes are not under direct conscious control. You cannot simply decide to activate one or the other. But breath is a bridge. Breath influences which mode is active. Slow, deep breathing activates the parasympathetic system. It sends signals through the vagus nerve that tell your body to relax. Heart rate decreases. Stress hormones reduce. The mental state shifts toward calm. This happens physiologically, automatically. You do not have to believe it will work. You simply have to breathe correctly and the mechanism operates. The body responds to the breath. The mind responds to the body. The chain of causation is reliable. Fast, shallow breathing activates the sympathetic system. It signals threat. It prepares for action. It creates the physiological conditions that produce anxiety. If you breathe this way, you will feel anxious regardless of whether anything threatening is actually happening. The breath creates the state. The state feels like it comes from external circumstances, but often the state comes from the breath. Often you're anxious because you're breathing like someone who should be anxious. Change the breath, and the anxiety loses its foundation. That is the key. Your breath has been creating mental states you thought were caused by circumstances. This is a profound realization. Much of your stress, your anxiety, your mental chaos has not been caused by what is happening around you. It has been caused by how you have been breathing. The circumstances seem to justify the state, but the breath was actually producing the state. Correct the breath, and the state changes even if the circumstances do not. It is not about breathing perfectly all the time. It is about having access to the control lever when you need it. Crisis arrives. Stress response activates. Breathing shifts toward rapid and shallow. This is automatic. This will happen. But now you know what is happening. Now you can intervene. Now you can take command of the breath and shift the state. The automatic response begins. The deliberate intervention redirects. The control lever works when you use it. Here is the protocol for practical breath control. First, develop awareness of your breathing throughout the day. Most people never notice their breath unless it becomes labored. But breath operates constantly, influencing state constantly. Build the habit of checking in with your breath. How am I breathing right now? Fast or slow? Shallow or deep? Chest or belly? This awareness is the foundation. You cannot control what you do not notice. Second, practice the calming breath pattern. Slow your breath to approximately 6 breaths per minute. This means roughly 5 seconds inhaling and 5 seconds exhaling. Breathe deeply, expanding your belly rather than your chest. This pattern reliably activates the parasympathetic system. This pattern produces calm even in stressful circumstances. Practice this pattern when you're not stressed so it becomes familiar. Then deploy it when stress arrives. Third, use breath to reset in difficult moments. Before an important conversation, slow and deepen your breath. Before a challenging task, take several calming breaths. When you notice anxiety rising, intervene immediately with controlled breathing. The reset is available anytime. The control lever is always accessible. You must simply remember to use it and have practiced enough that using it feels natural. Fourth, explore different breath patterns for different purposes. The calming breath is most essential but not the only useful pattern. Energizing breath patterns can increase alertness when needed. Focusing breath patterns can sharpen concentration. The breath is versatile. Different patterns produce different states. Learning multiple patterns expands your control repertoire. You have a choice. Learn these breath protocols and gain immediate access to mental state control, or ignore the control center you carry with you and continue having no direct influence over how you feel. The protocols are simple. The practice is accessible. The results are immediate and measurable. There is no reason not to develop this skill except the failure to recognize its importance. Here is what breath control makes possible. Anxiety becomes optional, not in the sense that you never feel it, in the sense that you can intervene and reduce it. The automatic response still begins, but it does not have to continue. It does not have to dominate. You have access to a reset that works physiologically, not just psychologically. The reset is reliable. The reset is available. Performance under pressure becomes accessible. The breath that prepares for fight or flight also degrades fine motor control and complex thinking. The breath that calms allows precise action and clear thought. By controlling breath in high-pressure moments, you maintain the physical and mental state that performance requires. The others around you may be degraded by stress. You remain capable because you control the lever they do not know exists. Peace becomes actively producible. You do not have to wait for circumstances to permit peace. You do not have to hope that conditions align for calm. You can produce the physiological state of peace through breath. Anywhere, anytime, the production is reliable. The access is permanent. Peace becomes something you create rather than something that happens to you. That is the key. The breath is always available. The control center is always accessible. The lever is always there to be used. Unlike external circumstances, which you cannot control, the breath is entirely yours. It responds to your direction. It produces states based on how you use it. This direct control over your own physiology is power that most people never develop despite carrying the capacity their entire lives. You understand now that breath is your control center. You see the mechanism that connects breathing to mental state. You have protocols for using breath deliberately, but there is a specific application of mental discipline that deserves focused attention. A voice inside that has been damaging you for years. The inner critic that tears you down while pretending to help. Chapter 7. Silence the inner critic. There's a voice in your head that hates you. It does not announce itself as hatred. It presents as helpfulness, as realism, as the voice of reason keeping you grounded. But examine what this voice actually says. You're not good enough. You will fail. Everyone sees your flaws. You do not deserve success. Remember that mistake you made years ago. You are an imposter. You will be exposed. This is not helpful guidance. This is psychological assault, and the attacker lives inside your own mind. The inner critic has been destroying your confidence, sabotaging your efforts, and poisoning your peace for years. And you have been listening to it as if it speaks truth. Here is what you need to understand. The inner critic is not wisdom. It is not your conscience. It is not the voice of realistic self-assessment. The inner critic is a pattern of mental noise that developed from external criticism you internalized. It speaks in the voices of parents who criticized you, teachers who corrected you, peers who mocked you, society that judged you. These external voices became internal. They became automatic. They now operate without the original speakers. The critic lives in your head, but it did not originate there. It was installed from outside. That is the key. The inner critic is not wisdom. The inner critic is noise disguised as guidance. This distinction is essential. If the critic were wisdom, you should listen to it. You should heed its guidance. You should follow its direction. But the critic is not wisdom. The critic is internalized criticism that no longer serves any purpose except to generate suffering. The original critics are gone or irrelevant, but the internal pattern continues. Speaking the same words, generating the same pain, serving no constructive function whatsoever. Think about what the critic actually accomplishes. Does criticism make you more confident? No, it destroys confidence. Does criticism improve your performance? No, it creates the anxiety that degrades performance. Does criticism motivate you? Perhaps occasionally through fear. But fear motivation is exhausting and unsustainable. Does criticism bring you peace? Never. Criticism generates the opposite of peace. The inner critic accomplishes nothing positive. It only damages. It only diminishes. It only destroys. And you have been treating this destructive voice as if it deserves attention. You have a choice. Continue listening to the critic and continue suffering its effects. Or learn to recognize the critic for what it is and reduce its power over your experience. One path accepts the critic as legitimate, as a voice worth hearing, as guidance worth following. The other path sees clearly that the critic serves no purpose, that its words are not truth, that its influence must be reduced through deliberate practice. Here is where the critic actually comes from. You are not born with an inner critic. Babies do not criticize themselves. The critic developed. It developed from external input that was repeated often enough to become internal. Consider the specific messages your critic delivers. You will recognize them. They are echoes of what was said to you by others. The parent who expressed disappointment. The teacher who highlighted inadequacy. The peer group that enforced conformity through mockery. Society that communicated what was acceptable and what was not. These external voices served purposes for those who spoke them. The parent was trying to shape you. The teacher was trying to correct you. The peers were trying to control you. Society was trying to conform you. Whether their purposes were good or harmful, their methods were criticism. And criticism repeated enough became internalized. The external voices became an internal voice. The voice of others became a voice that seemed like your own. But it was never truly yours. It was always installed programming running without your permission. That is the key. The critic speaks with borrowed voices. It presents as your own thought. But trace any critical message back, and you'll find its origin in something someone else said to you. The critic is an echo chamber of external criticism. It has no original wisdom. It has no independent insight. It simply repeats what was installed, often decades ago, by people who may no longer be relevant to your life. You have been suffering because of programming you did not choose, installed by people who may not have had your best interests at heart. It is not about blaming those who install the programming. Many were well-intentioned. Many were doing what they thought was best. Many were simply repeating what was done to them. Understanding the origin is not about assigning blame. Understanding the origin is about recognizing that the critic is not some fundamental truth about who you are. It is patterns that develop from specific historical inputs. Patterns can be changed. Programming can be updated. The critic is not permanent. Here is how to recognize the critic when it speaks. The critic has a distinctive tone. Notice when the voice becomes harsh. Notice when judgments appear that are absolute. You always fail. You never succeed. You are completely inadequate. This absolutism is the critic's signature. Reality rarely deals in absolutes. The critic always does. When you hear absolute judgments about yourself, you are hearing the critic. The critic also focuses on the negative while ignoring the positive. It notices every flaw and overlooks every strength. It remembers every failure and forgets every success. It compares you unfavorably to others while ignoring ways you exceed them. This selective attention is another signature. Genuine self-assessment sees both strengths and weaknesses. The critic sees only what can be used against you. The critic makes predictions of failure. You will mess this up. They will see through you. This will end badly. These predictions feel like realistic preparation. They are actually anxiety generation. The critic does not predict to protect you. The critic predicts to paralyze you, to make you afraid to act, to keep you small and safe in ways that serve the critic's survival, not your flourishing. You have a choice. Continue being deceived by the critic's disguise of helpfulness, or learn to recognize its signatures and see it for what it is. Recognition is the first step to reducing power. When you catch the critic speaking and label it as the critic rather than as truth, something shifts. The automatic acceptance is interrupted. The space for questioning opens. The critic's power begins to diminish. Here is the protocol for silencing the critic. First, catch the critic in the act. When critical thoughts arise, notice them explicitly. There is the critic again. This labeling creates distance. It separates you from the thought. It positions you as the observer of the critic rather than the believer of the critic. Each time you catch and label, you strengthen the observer and weaken the identification with critical content. Second, question the critic's claims. Is this actually true? Would I say this to someone I love? Is this absolute judgment accurate or an exaggeration? The critic depends on automatic acceptance. When you question, you break the automaticity. Often the critic's claims dissolve under examination. They are revealed as distortions, exaggerations, and lies that only seem true because they were never questioned. Third, do not argue with the critic. This seems contradictory, but is essential. Questioning is different from arguing. Questioning briefly examines validity. Arguing engages extensively with the content. When you argue with the critic, you give it attention. Attention strengthens what it is given to. Question briefly, recognize the distortion, and then withdraw attention. Do not engage in extended internal debate. The debate itself feeds the critic. Fourth, replace critic messages with accurate assessment, not artificial positivity. Accurate assessment. The critic says you always fail. Accurate assessment recognizes that you sometimes succeed and sometimes fail like everyone else. The critic says you are not good enough. Accurate assessment recognizes specific strengths and specific areas for growth. Replace the distortion with accuracy, not with equally distorted positivity, with truth that accounts for the full picture the critic ignores. That is the key. The critic is silenced through recognition, questioning, attention withdrawal, and replacement with accuracy. Not through fighting. Fighting engages. Engagement strengthens. The critic wants your attention, even if that attention is hostile. Give it nothing. Recognize it, question it briefly, withdraw, and redirect to accurate assessment. Consider what becomes possible when the critic is silenced. Confidence becomes accessible, not arrogance. Genuine confidence based on accurate self-assessment that includes your real strengths. Action becomes easier. The paralysis that critic predictions created dissolves. You can move toward goals without the constant whisper that you will fail. Peace becomes more constant. The background noise of self-criticism stops. The assault ends. What remains is quiet where there was once constant attack. The critic has been damaging you for years, perhaps decades. It has stolen confidence. It has prevented action. It has poisoned peace. But its power is not inevitable. Its voice can be recognized and reduced. Its influence can be diminished through consistent practice. The critic that seemed like such a permanent part of your experience is actually just noise. Noise that can be quieted. Noise that can eventually be silenced almost entirely. You understand now that the inner critic is not wisdom, but noise. You see where it came from and how it operates. You have techniques for recognition and silencing. But the critic is only one application of mental discipline. There's a broader skill that encompasses all others. The ability to create space between what happens to you and how you respond. Chapter 8. Master the space between stimulus and response. Something happens and you react. The sequence seems instant, seamless, inevitable. A stimulus arrives and a response follows as if connected by unbreakable chain. Someone says something offensive and anger arises. A situation becomes difficult and anxiety appears. A challenge presents itself and fear emerges. The connection between trigger and reaction feels automatic. Feels like the only possibility. Feels like simply how you are wired. But this feeling is an illusion. The connection is not unbreakable. The response is not inevitable. Between every stimulus and every response, there is a space, a gap where choice lives, a moment where freedom exists. You have simply been missing it because no one taught you to look for it. Here is what you need to understand. The reactive pattern is learned, not fixed. You are not born reacting to specific triggers with specific responses. The pattern's developed through repetition, through conditioning, through experiences that taught you to respond certain ways to certain stimuli. These patterns feel natural because they are familiar. They feel inevitable because they have operated so long without interruption. But learned patterns can be unlearned. Conditioned responses can be reconditioned. The automatic can become deliberate. The reactive can become responsive. That is the key. In the space between stimulus and response lives your entire freedom. This is not exaggeration. All the freedom you could ever experience exists in that space. The freedom to choose calm instead of anxiety. The freedom to choose measured response instead of explosive reaction. The freedom to choose aligned action instead of conditioned behavior. Without the space, there's no freedom. You are simply a machine executing programmed responses to identified triggers. With the space, everything changes. You become capable of response that serves you rather than response that merely happens to you. Think about what happens currently. A stimulus arrives. Perhaps criticism from someone who matters. Perhaps unexpected difficulty in a project. Perhaps a comment that triggers insecurity. The stimulus arrives and reaction follows immediately. No gap, no pause, no moment of consideration. The reaction simply happens. You did not choose it. You did not evaluate it. You did not select it from among possible responses. It simply occurred because the stimulus triggered the pattern and the pattern executed automatically. Now consider what becomes possible with the space. The same stimulus arrives. The same criticism. The same difficulty. The same triggering comment. But now there is a pause. A gap between the arrival and the response. In that gap, awareness operates. You notice the stimulus. You notice the impulse to react. You notice what the automatic response would be. And from that noticing, you choose. You might choose the same response you would have made automatically. Sometimes the automatic response is appropriate, but you might choose differently. You might choose calm instead of anger, curiosity instead of defensiveness, strategic action instead of emotional reaction. The choice becomes available because the space exists. You have a choice. Continue living without the space and continue being controlled by stimulus response patterns you did not choose and do not serve you. Or develop the space and gain access to the freedom that exists when you can choose your responses rather than having them chosen for you. One path keeps you a machine, predictable, programmable, controllable by anyone who knows your triggers. The other path makes you free, unpredictable in the best sense, capable of responses that serve your interests rather than merely execute your conditioning. Here is how to expand the space. The space exists already. It has always existed, but it has been collapsed to nearly nothing through years of instant reaction. Expanding the space requires deliberate practice. The practice interrupts the automatic execution. The practice inserts awareness where there was none. The practice builds the gap that conditioning collapsed. First, practice awareness of triggers. Before you can expand the space, you must notice that a stimulus has occurred. Most reactions begin before conscious awareness even registers the trigger. The reaction is already underway when you notice anything happening. Practice noticing triggers earlier. What situations tend to provoke you? What types of comments activate you? What circumstances generate automatic responses? Know your triggers before they are pulled. This knowledge provides the earliest possible warning that a reaction is imminent. Second, practice noticing the impulse before the action. Between the trigger and the full reaction, there's an impulse, a surge of energy toward the conditioned response. This impulse can be noticed. When the trigger is pulled, feel the impulse arise. Notice the energy moving toward reaction. This noticing creates a split second of awareness that begins to expand the space. You have not stopped the reaction yet, but you have begun inserting awareness into the sequence. Third, practice pausing physically. The body and mind are connected. Physical pause supports mental pause. When you notice a trigger, deliberately slow your body. Take a breath before speaking. Delay physical movement by even a second. This physical pause creates time for the mental space to expand. The breath technique you learned becomes essential here. A slow breath in the moment of trigger expands the space more effectively than almost anything else. Fourth, practice questioning the automatic response. Once you have created any space at all, use it to question. Is the automatic response appropriate here? Does it serve my interests? Is there a better response available? These questions do not need lengthy consideration. A moment of questioning is enough to break the automatic execution. The questioning reveals that choice exists. The choice reveals that you're not bound to the conditioned pattern. That is the key. The space is expanded through practice at each stage of the stimulus-response sequence. Awareness of triggers, noticing of impulse, physical pause, questioning of automatic response. Each practice expands the space slightly. Combined, they transform the collapsed instant between stimulus and response into a genuine gap where choice can operate. It is not about perfect control. It is not about never reacting automatically. The patterns are strong. The conditioning is deep. You will still react sometimes before awareness catches up. But each successful expansion of the space weakens the automatic pattern. Each chosen response, instead of automatic reaction, builds the capacity for more choice next time. The practice is progressive. The skill develops over time. Perfect control is not the goal. Increasing freedom is the goal. Here is how to use the space strategically. Once the space exists, you must use it well. The space provides the opportunity for choice. But you must know how to choose. You must have criteria for selecting responses that serve you better than automatic reactions would. Consider the question of proportion. Automatic reactions are often disproportionate. A small offense triggers massive anger. A minor setback triggers overwhelming anxiety. A slight criticism triggers complete defensiveness. In the space, you can calibrate. Is this stimulus worth this level of response? The answer is often no. The space allows proportionate response where automatic reaction was disproportionate. Consider the question of goals. Automatic reactions often undermine your goals. Anger at a colleague damages the working relationship you need. Defensiveness with a partner escalates conflict you want to resolve. Anxiety about a challenge degrades the performance you want to deliver. In the space, you can align response with goals. What response actually serves what I am trying to accomplish? The automatic response often does not. A chosen response can. Consider the question of values. Automatic reactions often violate your values. You value patience but react impatiently. You value kindness but react harshly. You value courage but react fearfully. In a space, you can choose responses aligned with who you want to be. What will my best self do here? The automatic response is often your worst self. The chosen response can be your best. You have a choice. Use the space merely to pause, which is valuable, or use the space strategically to select responses based on proportion, goals, and values. The strategic use transforms the space from simple delay into genuine freedom. You do not just pause before reacting. You choose how to respond based on what actually serves you. Here is what mastery of the space produces. You become unpredictable to those who know your triggers. The person who could always provoke you finds their provocations landing on nothing. The situations that always destabilized you find you stable regardless. The patterns that controlled you lose their grip. You respond based on choice, not conditioning. Based on strategy, not reflex. Based on who you want to be, not who programming made you. You become trustworthy to yourself. When you react automatically, you often violate your own standards. You say things you regret. You do things that do not align with your values. You become someone you do not want to be in moments of reaction. But when you master the space, you can trust yourself to respond well. You know that triggers will not control you. You know that conditioning will not override your choice. You become reliable to yourself in a way that automatic reaction never allowed. You become free in the most meaningful sense. Not free from difficulty. Difficulty continues. Not free from triggers. Triggers continue. Free to choose your response regardless of what happens. Free to remain aligned with your values regardless of provocation. Free to pursue your goals regardless of circumstances that would have derailed automatic responses. This freedom is the fruit of the space. This freedom is what mastery produces. You understand now the space between stimulus and response. You see how to expand it and how to use it strategically. You recognize the freedom that mastery produces. But all of this requires ongoing practice, not occasional effort. Daily discipline that builds and maintains the capacity for mental stillness. Chapter 9. Build the daily practice. Everything you have learned requires practice, not understanding, not agreement, not occasional effort when you remember. Daily practice. Consistent, deliberate, non-negotiable engagement with the skills that produce mental stillness. Without daily practice, the skills atrophy. The space collapses. The critic regains its voice. The automatic patterns reassert themselves. The noise returns to drown out the stillness you briefly accessed. You cannot learn mental discipline once and have it forever. You must practice mental discipline continuously or lose what you developed. This is not optional. This is the nature of the skill you are building. Here is what you need to understand. Mental discipline operates like physical fitness. You do not exercise once and remain fit forever. You exercise consistently or fitness fades. The muscles weaken. The endurance decreases. The capacity you built disappears without the ongoing maintenance that built it. Mental discipline is identical. The capacity for stillness weakens without practice. The ability to expand the space decreases without use. The skill of silencing the critic fades without continued application. Daily practice is not extra. Daily practice is essential. That is the key. One day of practice is nothing. Every day of practice is everything. The single session accomplishes little. The insight fades. The skill remains undeveloped. The capacity stays weak. But the daily session, repeated without exception, transforms everything. The insight deepens into understanding. The understanding develops into skill. The skill strengthens into capacity. The capacity becomes reliable, available, permanent. The difference between occasional practice and daily practice is not degree. The difference is kind. They produce fundamentally different results. Think about what happens without daily practice. You read this audiobook. You understand the concepts. You try some techniques. Perhaps you experience moments of stillness, glimpses of the space, brief quieting of the critic. These experiences feel significant. They suggest what is possible. But then life continues. Demands arise. Distractions multiply. Days pass without practice. The glimpses fade. The concepts become abstract memories rather than lived experience. Within weeks, you have returned to exactly where you started. The noise is back. The reactivity is back. The critic is back. Nothing has actually changed because nothing was actually maintained. Now consider what happens with daily practice. You read this audiobook. You understand the concepts. You begin practicing daily. The first days are difficult. The mind resists. The stillness is brief and unstable. But you continue. Day after day, the resistance weakens. The stillness extends. The capacity builds. Weeks pass, and the glimpses become sustained experiences. Months pass, and the skills become reliable capacities. The noise is reduced not occasionally, but consistently. The space is available not rarely, but reliably. The critic speaks less because you have practiced silencing it so many times. Something has actually changed because something was actually maintained. You have a choice. Practice daily and transform, or practice occasionally and remain unchanged. One path requires commitment, requires protecting time, requires showing up even when you do not feel like it. The other path is easier, requires nothing, demands nothing, produces nothing. The choice seems small. The consequences are enormous. Here is what the morning ritual should contain. The morning is when mental discipline is established for the day. How you begin determines how you continue. A morning surrender to noise produces a day dominated by noise. A morning claimed by stillness produces a day accessible to stillness. The ritual is not optional. The ritual is how you set the conditions for everything that follows. First, create protected time before the world intrudes, before demands arise, before notifications begin their assault. This time must be non-negotiable, not time you hope to have, time you guarantee you will have. Wake earlier if necessary. Eliminate whatever prevents this time from existing. The protection of this time is the protection of your mental discipline. Without the time, the ritual cannot happen. Without the ritual, the discipline cannot build. Second, begin with breath. Use the techniques you learned. Slow, deep breathing that activates the parasympathetic system. That signals safety to your nervous system. That begins shifting your state from the chaos of sleep and automatic morning reactivity toward the calm that practice requires. Several minutes of deliberate breathing establishes the physiological foundation for what follows. Third, practice observation. Sit with your mind and observe. Do not try to stop thoughts. Do not try to force stillness. Simply observe what arises. Watch thoughts appear and disappear. Notice the mental noise without engaging with it. This observation strengthens the observer self. This observation builds the muscle that allows you to remain separate from the noise. 10 minutes of observation builds more capacity than hours of hoping for stillness. Fourth, set intention for the day. What space will you maintain? What triggers will you watch for? What critic messages will you be alert to? How will you use breath when difficulty arises? The intention sets direction. The intention prepares you for what the day will bring. Without intention, you enter the day reactive. With intention, you enter the day prepared. That is the key. The morning ritual establishes mental discipline before life challenges it. The breath calms. The observation strengthens. The intention prepares. Combined, they create a foundation that supports stillness throughout whatever the day brings. Without this foundation, you are building on sand. Each challenge destabilizes. Each trigger succeeds. Each wave of noise overwhelms. With the foundation, you are building on rock. Challenges are met from stability. Triggers are observed rather than obeyed. Noise is recognized rather than absorbed. It is not about lengthy practice. It is about consistent practice. 20 minutes every day produces more than 2 hours occasionally. The consistency builds what duration cannot. The daily repetition creates habits that sporadic effort never establishes. If you have limited time, reduce duration but maintain consistency. 10 minutes every day surpasses an hour once a week. 5 minutes every day surpasses nothing most days. Here is how to integrate practice throughout the day. The morning ritual is essential but not sufficient. Mental discipline must extend beyond formal practice into lived experience. The day provides countless opportunities to practice. The integration makes discipline continuous rather than compartmentalized. Practice breath awareness throughout the day. Check in with your breathing at regular intervals. How am I breathing right now? Is it supporting calm or generating anxiety? Make adjustments when needed. Use breath as the control lever it is, not just in formal practice, but in ongoing life. The check-in can be brief. A few seconds of awareness. A few deliberate breaths if adjustment is needed. These micro-practices accumulate into significant impact. Practice observation throughout the day. Notice when the critic speaks and label it. Notice when triggers arise and observe the impulse before reacting. Notice when noise increases and recognize it as noise rather than reality. These moments of observation during ordinary life build the skill more than formal practice alone could. Life becomes the training ground. Every experience becomes an opportunity to strengthen the observer. Practice the space throughout the day. When stimuli arrive that would normally trigger automatic reaction, pause. Use the gap. Choose response rather than allowing reaction. Each successful use of the space in real situations builds confidence that the space is available. Each chosen response, instead of automatic reaction, proves that freedom is real. The practice during life is where the training is tested and refined. You have a choice. Compartmentalize practice into formal sessions alone, or integrate practice throughout the day, making every moment an opportunity for strengthening discipline. Formal practice alone produces limited results. Integrated practice produces transformation. The discipline becomes not something you do, but someone you are. Not an activity, but an identity. Here is what the evening review should contain. The day ends with assessment. Not judgment. Assessment. How did practice go today? Where did stillness hold? Where did it break? What triggers succeeded in pulling automatic reaction? What critic messages went unquestioned? The review provides information. The information guides tomorrow's practice. Notice patterns. Which situations consistently challenge your stillness? Which triggers reliably succeed? Which critic messages repeatedly gain traction? These patterns reveal where practice must focus. General practice builds general capacity. Targeted practice builds specific capacity where is most needed. Acknowledge progress, not falsely, accurately. Where did you maintain stillness that would have been impossible before? Where did you use the space when previously you would have reacted? Where did you silence the critic when previously you would have believed it? Progress often goes unnoticed because attention focuses on failures. The review deliberately notices progress. This noticing reinforces the practice. This noticing motivates continued effort. Set intention for tomorrow. Based on what today revealed, what will you focus on tomorrow? What triggers will you prepare for? What patterns will you work to interrupt? The evening review connects to the morning ritual. The cycle continues, each day informing the next, each practice building on what came before. That is the key. The daily practice is a cycle. Morning ritual establishes. Throughout day, integration applies. Evening review assesses. The cycle repeats without end. Not because discipline is never achieved, because discipline is maintained through ongoing practice. The master continues practicing. The expert continues training. The discipline never graduates into something that no longer requires practice. The practice is the discipline. The discipline is the practice. Consider what consistent daily practice produces over time. 1 month of daily practice builds noticeable capacity. 3 months builds reliable skill. 1 year builds deep transformation. 5 years builds mastery. 10 years builds something extraordinary. The accumulation is slow but inevitable. The compound effect operates. Each day adds to what previous days built. The trajectory is upward as long as practice continues. Downward the moment practice stops. You understand now that daily practice is essential. You see the structure of morning ritual, throughout day integration, and evening review. You recognize the compound effect of consistent effort over time. But practice serves a purpose. The purpose is mastery, becoming someone whose mind obeys rather than commands. Chapter 10. Become the master of your mind. You have learned 9 principles, 9 chapters of mental discipline, 9 pathways toward control over a mind that has been controlling you. But learning is not mastery. Understanding is not transformation. You can know every principle in this audiobook and remain exactly as chaotic, as reactive, as dominated by mental noise as you were when you started. Because mastery is not knowledge. Mastery is practice embodied. Mastery is principles lived so consistently that they become who you are rather than what you know. The master of the mind is not someone who understands mental discipline. The master is someone whose mind obeys. Here is what you need to understand. Everything you have learned integrates into a single capacity. The recognition that your mind is not your friend, but a tool requiring command. The awareness of what mental noise costs you. The distinction between you and your thoughts. The active discipline of stillness. The command of attention. The use of breath as control center. The silencing of the inner critic. The expansion of the space between stimulus and response. The daily practice that builds and maintains all of these. Each element supports the others. Each principle reinforces the rest. Together, they form a complete system for mental mastery. Separately, they are techniques. Together, they are transformation. That is the key. The master is not someone without thoughts. The master is someone whose thoughts obey. This distinction matters. Mastery does not mean an empty mind. Mastery does not mean the absence of mental activity. The mind will continue producing thoughts. The mind will continue generating content. This production cannot be stopped any more than the heart can be stopped from beating. But the master's relationship to this production is fundamentally different from the slave's relationship. The slave is controlled by thoughts. The master directs thoughts. The slave is swept along by mental activity. The master observes mental activity and chooses what to engage with. The difference is not in what the mind does. The difference is in who is in command. Think about what mastery actually looks like in daily life. The master wakes and the mind begins its noise. Worries about the day. Concerns about problems. The familiar mental chatter that greets most mornings. But the master does not engage. The master observes the noise, recognizes it as noise, and directs attention elsewhere. To the breath. To the present moment. To whatever serves the master's purposes. The noise continues in the background. The noise does not command the master's experience. The master faces difficulty and the mind generates fear. Predictions of failure. Catastrophic scenarios. The familiar anxiety that difficulty triggers in most people. But the master does not become the fear. The master observes fear arising, recognizes it as mental production, and chooses response from clarity rather than reaction from anxiety. The fear continues as mental content. The fear does not determine the master's actions. The master receives criticism and the inner critic amplifies. You are not good enough. They're right about you. The familiar self-attack that criticism triggers in most people. But the master does not believe the critic. The master recognizes the critic's voice, questions its claims, and withdraws attention. The critic may continue speaking. The critic does not determine the master's self-assessment. You have a choice. Remain a slave to mental activity, controlled by every thought, dominated by every emotion, reactive to every trigger. Or pursue mastery, developing the capacity to observe, direct, and command the mind that has been commanding you. One path is default. It requires nothing because it changes nothing. The other path requires everything you have learned put into consistent practice. But only the second path leads to freedom. Only mastery produces a life where you determine your experience rather than your mind determining it for you. Here is what the life of mental mastery contains. Clarity available in every decision. The noise that clouds most people's judgment is quiet in the master. The anxiety that distorts most people's perception is observed without identification. The master sees clearly because nothing internal obstructs the view. Decisions are made from accurate assessment rather than from mental noise that masquerades as assessment. The clarity is not occasional. The clarity is consistent because the stillness that produces it is maintained. Presence available in every relationship. The master is fully here, not lost in mental chatter about past or future, not distracted by internal noise that prevents connection, fully present with whoever is in front of them. This presence transforms relationships. People feel seen by the master because the master actually sees them. People feel heard by the master because the master actually listens. The attention that most people cannot give because their minds are elsewhere is available because the master commands where attention goes. Peace available in every moment, not dependent on circumstances, not contingent on things going well. Peace that exists because the internal conditions for peace are maintained regardless of external conditions. The master is not at war with their own mind. The master is not assaulted by constant criticism, worry, and noise. The master has established internal peace and maintains it through the practices that produce it. This peace is not passive. This peace is actively created and actively protected. But the result is stability that circumstance cannot disturb. Performance available in every domain. Excellence requires focus. Focus requires mental discipline. The master can bring full attention to any task, can sustain concentration when others become distracted, can enter states of deep engagement that produce outstanding results. The performance is not superhuman. The performance is what becomes available when the human mind is properly commanded rather than left to run wild. Most people never access their full capability because mental noise prevents it. The master accesses capability that was always present but previously blocked. That is the key. Mastery unlocks what was already there. The clarity was always possible. The presence was always available. The peace was always accessible. The performance was always within capability. These were blocked by mental noise, by identification with thoughts, by reactivity to triggers, by an untrained mind running without direction. Remove the blocks through mastery, and what was always possible becomes actual. You do not gain something foreign through mastery. You access something native that noise was obscuring. It is not about becoming someone different. It is about becoming who you actually are beneath the noise. The noise is not you. The chaos is not you. The reactivity is not you. These are products of an untrained mind. The real you is the awareness that can observe all of this. The real you is the consciousness that exists beneath and beyond the mental content. Mastery does not create a new self. Mastery reveals the self that was always present, but hidden under layers of uncontrolled mental activity. Here is the ongoing journey of mastery. Mastery is not a destination reached once. Mastery is a practice maintained continuously. The master does not stop practicing because mastery is achieved. The master continues practicing because practice is what mastery means. The morning ritual continues. The throughout-day integration continues. The evening review continues. The daily discipline that built mastery maintains mastery. Without continued practice, mastery fades. With continued practice, mastery deepens. Consider what deepening mastery looks like. The master of 1 year has solid discipline. The noise is reduced. The space is available. The stillness is accessible. But the master of 10 years has something more. A depth of stillness that the 1-year master cannot yet access. A speed of space expansion that seems instantaneous. A quieting of the critic so complete that its voice is barely remembered. The practice continues and the mastery deepens. There is no ceiling. There is no point where further development stops. The journey extends as long as practice continues. Recovery is part of the journey. Even masters lose discipline sometimes. Life overwhelms. Practice lapses. The old patterns reassert themselves. This is not failure. This is the reality of being human. The master recovers, recognizes that discipline has slipped, returns to practice without self-condemnation, rebuilds what was lost. Recovery is faster than original development because the pathways exist. Recovery is part of mastery rather than evidence of failed mastery. You have a choice. Pursue mastery as a lifelong journey, knowing that the journey extends as long as you continue walking it, or abandon the pursuit, returning to the slavery of an uncontrolled mind. The journey requires commitment, requires consistency, requires practice maintained across years and decades. But the journey produces a life fundamentally different from the life of mental slavery. A life of clarity instead of confusion, presence instead of absence, peace instead of chaos, performance instead of potential blocked by noise. Here is your challenge. Tomorrow morning, begin. Not with perfection, with practice. Create protected time. Use breath to establish calm. Observe without engaging. Set intention for the day. Then live the day with awareness. Notice triggers. Expand the space. Silence the critic. Direct attention. Use breath when difficulty arises. Evening comes and you review. What worked? What did not? What tomorrow will focus on? Then you sleep, and the next morning you begin again. This cycle, repeated without end, produces mastery. Not quickly, not easily, but inevitably. The compound effect of daily practice accumulates into transformation that cannot be achieved any other way. The slave becomes the master. The controlled becomes the controller. The victim of the mind becomes the commander of the mind. Stop being controlled by mental noise. Stop being dominated by thoughts you did not choose. Stop being reactive to triggers that have been running your life. Stop being assaulted by an inner critic that serves no purpose except destruction. Start observing without identifying. Start commanding attention where it serves you. Start using breath as the control center it is. Start expanding the space where freedom lives. Start practicing daily without exception. Become the master of your mind. Not tomorrow, not eventually. Starting now. The noise has controlled you long enough. The chaos has dominated long enough. The untrained mind has run your life long enough. Take command. The mind that has been your enemy becomes your tool. The noise that has been your prison becomes background you can ignore. The thoughts that have been your masters become servants of your purposes. Silence your mind. Control your life. The mastery begins now. You have learned 10 truths about mental discipline. You learned that your mind is not your friend, that the noise is costing you everything, that you're not your thoughts, that stillness is active discipline, not passive relaxation. You learned that attention is your fundamental resource, that breath is your control center, that the inner critic must be silenced, that the space between stimulus and response contains your freedom. You learned to build a daily practice, and you learned what it means to become the master of your mind rather than its slave. But here's what matters now. Tomorrow morning, the noise will begin. The thoughts will race. The worries will spin. The mental chaos will attempt to dominate your day. And in that moment, you will have a choice. Surrender to the noise like you always have. or practice the discipline you now understand. Command the stillness. Direct the attention. Use the breath. Silence the critic. Expand the space. Choose your response rather than being controlled by your reaction. The person who can do this is free. Not free from challenges. Free from being controlled by their own mind during challenges. Not free from difficulty. Free from mental noise that makes difficulty unbearable. Not free from the world. Free from the internal chaos that prevents effective engagement with the world. Stop being a slave to your thoughts. Stop being controlled by mental noise. Stop letting your untrained mind destroy your focus, your peace, your relationships, your life. Start practicing stillness. Start commanding your attention. Start using your breath. Start silencing the noise. Become the master of your mind.